All right. We're still waiting on 2, looks like, but that's fine. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for being with us this morning. I want to go over the weekly schedule quickly before we get started this morning. This is week 9, case study 16A, PowerPoint and reflection. Please remember to upload your PowerPoint and your reflection in the drop boxes after today. After today, we will have weeks 10 through 17. So we're moving into the second half of the course. You've got your discussion boards on Merriam. Continue to work on Salkind. Please remember those Salkind tests are for your own edification and for your own learning and going deeper into quantitative statistics. They're good exercises for you, though, but they are only that. They're exercises. Week after next is the Easter holiday week. I don't have anything. Good morning, Terrence. I don't have anything on the good morning, Sheldon.
Good morning. How are you?
Good. I don't have anything. And then we'll be back together the following week for our data gathering Zoom session. And then you're at home, continue to work on Salkind. You got the errors questions from Super Crunchers. And then we'll be back again on April 23rd through the 29th, on Saturday the 28th, PowerPoint and reflection. And then our last session face-to-face are Saturday and Sunday, April 7th and 8th. Sheldon will have to record the masters, I think, but that's just part of it.
What a sacrifice, huh?
Sacrifice. It is for me. So that's how much I love you all, that I'd miss watching the masters live and get it recorded on DVR. All right, so that's where we are. We move into the second half. Keep up with your discussion boards. Remember, Salkind tests are, I won't say they're optional, but they're just for your learning. Those don't factor into your grade. So keep up with your discussion boards, though. All right, this morning, case study 16A, qualitative and quantitative. You know that there was some open-ended qualitative questions on the data that was presented, and there was a data set of quantitative from a survey response. Let me get out of that. All right, so team diagnosis and intervention. So what you find is here's your quantitative data. It's displayed in numbers. And then here's your qualitative. Here are the questions that were asked. All right, and your task was to, what do you believe is happening on this team? What do team members say are the team struggles? What do team members say are the team's areas of improvement? What would you prioritize as the opportunities for improvement? How would you present this data in the team feedback session? What team development interventions would you recommend? Design an intervention plan, including agenda, timeline, and any activities that you would suggest. All right. So that was your task. Now, a personal question here before we get started. Morning, Katie. What do I consider, as a quantitative person, what do I consider wrong with this survey in terms of the Likert scale?
Oh, you don't like the neither agree nor disagree. You just want the
That's correct. I do not like column 3. I do not suggest that you use that in quantitative data collection. Mm-hmm. Why is that?
Well, it doesn't make people commit. You know, we found out on ours that, I mean, there's a lot of people that said neither agree nor disagree, so that really doesn't give you any information.
There you go. What do you learn from that? You learn nothing from that. Actually, when you try to run data analysis, if you have a lot of those, you won't find anything one way or the other, because those will balance out your those will lessen your findings in one direction or the other. Remember, when we're looking for correlations, we don't care if they're positive or negative. We just want to know what the number is. When you have that middle column, you will never get a correlation that's strong enough that you can act upon it, unfortunately. I did a 2-column Pearson's R for a doctoral student this week. And the correlation, and it will even tell you the strength of the correlation. The correlation came back at like 0.45 positive. But, and it even says in the analysis when you do a Pearson's R that although there is a positive correlation, it's a weak correlation. It's not strong enough. It's not meaningful. You know why it wasn't meaningful? Because he had that middle column.
Did he not have you as a professor?
Do what?
Did he not have you as a professor to like get it in his head?
Well, you know, they only call me when there's a problem.
A little bit too late.
Yeah, that's what I said. The horse is gone, the barn's burned down. Not a lot I can do to help you now. We don't know what to do. Well, you report what you found. But you know, we needed to show some results one way or the other. Well, I said you shouldn't have, you know, you should have used a better instrument then. Can we go back and do it again? No. You can't go back and do it again. So
that's to Sheila's point when we talked about, you know, what we were going to decide to do, and we were, I said, well, we could resurvey. She's like, nobody's going to take that.
That's
Nobody's going to take another survey.
Not going to happen. And also that speaks to reliability.
Right.
Somebody explain that one to me. When I say that speaks to reliability, given the same survey but changing the instrument.
Yeah, you can't change it.
No, can't change it.
You're not measuring the same thing. You're not measuring. I mean, even the circumstances are different.
The results will not be reliable. It won't harm your validity because the instrument is still the instrument.
Right.
But it blows your reliability out of the water to resurvey the same thing and just change the instrument scoring. Can't do that. If you're going to do that, why don't you just make it up? You wasted all that time surveying. Why don't you just make it up to begin with? You'd have the same amount of reliability if you just made it up. And part of the problem here on this one is that we really don't know how, because there are so many. Look at some of these with some of these the most answered response is neither agree nor disagree.
Right.
This is a classic example of because you didn't set your study up the right way, because you didn't really understand quantitative analysis. There isn't really any analysis that you can do here. If we ran this for correlation, we wouldn't find any that were strong enough to act upon because we offered them the opportunity to opt out of giving us an answer. Now, if we want to give them, people say, well, the people ought to have the right to opt out. Well, then they cannot take the survey. That's the opt-out option. Just don't take the survey if you don't want to. But don't waste people's time by giving them the opportunity to take a survey and then you setting it up in a way that when you get it, that the data is not actionable. That's exactly what's happened here. We'll proceed on, but there's always that nagging feeling that we really don't know because we didn't understand what we were trying to do, and we ended up with survey data that's so bland that it doesn't give us any correlations and nothing that we can really proceed on with any degree of confidence.
Well, let me ask a question to that point. I mean, because I've seen a lot of surveys that have neither agree or disagree. Why do you think, and of course I don't like making assumptions, but especially from large to medium organizations when they're doing surveys like this, and obviously you would think that they have consulted with someone that would understand that, that's insignificant. So why do they continue? Any particular theory on why that continues to happen?
Oh, that's really simple. we don't want the data to show to show somebody in a bad light. It's kind of like we want to steal second base, but we want to keep our foot on first because we're afraid of the risk. It's almost as if we're afraid to find out what's really going on, and we don't want it to be too bad one way or the other. And this is the way that the data won't be a landslide in one direction or the other. It will always be more toward the middle.
Okay.
It protects turf and people, feelings, jobs.
Okay.
It's a way to play it safe. It'll give us some leaning, but it won't be conclusive. And that's, remember, there's positions, turf, territory, and jobs usually tied to this kind of thing. And it's kind of a way to play it safe organizationally.
Okay.
That's the unfortunate business of data is we've got our thumb on the scale before we even start, trying to keep it balanced so it doesn't, it doesn't show up as badly as it is. What you see here, I hope you all picked up on this, because they had a column 3 here. The quantitative data is not nearly as damning as the qualitative.
Oh, yeah.
They don't match. Did you pick up on that? Because the majority of people answered right down the middle on the survey. You gave them that option. The survey results don't look that bad, but
Right.
Did you see the qualitative on this one?
Mm-hmm.
The qualitative is not good, but the quantitative doesn't look that bad. And so when we put it in chart and graph form, it doesn't look bad at all. But then when we have this stuff, oh my Lord, you realize this is dysfunctional. But our numbers don't tell us it's dysfunctional because we set it up that way. We didn't want the black and white, the hard numbers to be that harsh. And so we basically, played it safe here on the survey. And it's almost like, well, we can chalk up the qualitative to a few crackpots. No, this is not good. This is not good, but the numbers don't show it to be as bad as it really is because we set it up that way. That's intentional. So that's a great question, Sheldon.
Okay, thanks.
That's why it is what it is. All right. Enough of that. All right, let's get started this morning. All right, so who is going to be our first person presenting today?
I'll go.
Jackie, is that you?
Courtney.
Courtney. Oh, you're not. My screen's only got half of you on it. All right, let me see. Where's Courtney? There you are. Okay, I'm going to.
Team, is that okay, team?
Good for me.
Okay.
Okay, I have made you the host.
Okay. So do I just show my screen?
Yes.
Okay, hold on 1 second.
And I'm going to stop my share. And as soon as you start screen sharing, there we go. Yay!
Courtney, I don't think anyone else has gotten it on the first try.
I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm doing it.
There you go.
Okay. Hold on. Let me move this over. Present. Okay. Can everyone see the PowerPoint?
Yeah,
Yes.
you're not in present mode. It doesn't matter, I guess. But I just want you to know it's not full screen.
Oh, it's not full screen?
Mm-mm. It's not in present mode.
Just your slides. You can just put the slides in present mode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, hold on.
There you go.
Oh, wait. Now it's okay?
You had it.
Right here? Lisa, is it okay now?
You had it for a second and now it went back to just the deck.
Now is it okay?
Mm-mm.
Hold on. Let me, oh, wait. Oh, hold on.
Usually present
Okay.
mode is all the way over to the right-hand side of the screen on the top.
I see it right here. Present.
Yeah.
That's what I clicked on.
Well, it's not doing it for us.
There's a little down arrow there right next to it.
Oh, okay. I see that. Present from beginning.
See what that does. Nope.
Did that work?
No.
That's weird. Let me see.
Nope.
No.
Tracy jinxed
I'm
it.
sorry. I don't know.
It's fine. Go right ahead. I mean, it's most of the screen. It's not a problem.
Okay. So, good morning, everyone. My name is Courtney Peterson, and I am here with my team. On the team, we are with Tracy, Michael, and Jackie. And today we're here to present on our case study, Team Diagnosis and Intervention. We are going to review the following objectives. We have the case summary. We're going to go over some learning objectives, identification of the central problem and secondary problems, solutions and recommendations, and then we're going to discuss a case analysis. Looking at the case summary, we understand that this case is analyzing a team's response to a work survey. It is comparing team diagnosis and intervention utilizing both quantitative and qualitative data from the team member responses. The goal of the study is to analyze the effectiveness of team performance through analysis and interpretation, and the results of the analysis will be displayed to determine the most effective recommendation.
So, Courtney, can you click on those actual slides? Because it's not showing up on our screen.
Okay, hold on one second. So,
Like, just move your slides along.
okay. Oops. Can you see it now?
Mm-mm.
I think if you arrow down.
Hold on one second.
Just click on the next slide. Just put your cursor on the next slide and click.
I'm on the next slide now.
No, over on. Do you see the sidebar? All right, you're on the first slide now. If you go straight down.
Okay. Let me do it this way.
No, just the actual physical slide. Just click on the slide that the next slide in the.
The one with the little people, Courtney.
I don't see any little people.
Slide 2.
Slide 2.
Okay, hold on. Let me go back.
If you're
Okay.
if you're still in present mode, just end present mode and just go based on the.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then just click on whatever slide you're on right now, number 2.
Okay.
Boom.
There you go.
Okay.
And then you did slide 3, right?
Right. So this is
Just go to
slide 4.
4. There you go.
I'm sorry, everybody. Oh gosh, I'm sorry.
That's all right. That way people can just see what we're saying.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Okay, so Courtney kind of told us what our case is, and so the learning objectives for this case, we didn't have any actual established, like written for us learning objectives. So our group just kind of decided what we thought the key points and learning objectives of the case were. So we said that the first one was to recognize the importance of both the quantitative and the qualitative data, which Dr. Lamb has already kind of touched on this morning. And then to also establish effective methods to present both types of the data, because we do have two types of data, and so we need to kind of describe both of them to the group. And then to identify the strengths and weaknesses of the team through the data interpretation that our group does. And then ultimately to take that data and develop an interventional strategy to increase the team collaboration, communication, and effectiveness. So some of the key points which we'll expand on through the case questions and case analysis are that we do have a high-performing team, but there isn't enough time to help each other out. So if someone falls, then they're kind of on their own just to figure it out and keep going, kind of that do-it-yourself mentality. But they are an actually high-performing team. There does seem to be some underappreciation of their hard work that they're doing and that they are actually being productive. And then we have you can see in the qualitative data that there is some communication issues around conflict and that there's no one really assigned to resolve those conflict issues. And then the organization wants them to function as a systems model, but they are actually functioning at a much lower level organization at this point due to some of the complications that they're having. And then we have wasted efficiency due to lack of thought and share. And then Jackie's going to expand on some of those things in the case questions.
Okay. So in the case questions, well, one of the things that we definitely notice is there is some contradictory data. So I'm going to go into that a little bit. So the first question is, what is happening on the team? And Tracy talked a little bit about this. There is a lack of communication and an inability to handle conflict well. The majority of the team understands the mission and their roles, but some members do not. However, some members do feel that they understand how they're contributing to the organizational goals. And some of that is contradictory, as we talked a little bit about with Dr. Lamb. Many are satisfied with their job, but there is a lack of pride among some of the team members. Team members reported that the meetings are ineffective and there's a lack of information sharing, and not all team members feel supported. So I just did a breakout of some of the strengths and some of the areas of improvement. And like I said, some of the data is contradictory. So this is just, an initial review. But for the strengths, there is an understanding from some of the mission and the goals among the majority. There is some job satisfaction and there is some support. However, for the areas of improvement, there is a definitely need for improvement when it comes to communication, the inability to handle conflict well, and of course the lack of pride and ineffective meetings is a huge issue for the team. So when prioritizing the areas for improvement, I thought a lot about communication because I know that communication is the foundation of just making any change when it comes to working with teams and being in the workforce. So I think that if they can work on the communication first, then that would definitely lead to an improvement among the team as a whole. So that could lead to more effective meetings, better conflict management, and just improvement just with them understanding the mission and the goals overall. So that was what I had for question 1. The next slide talks a little bit about question 2. And the question 2 was, how would you present the data in a team feedback session? So I thought a little bit about this, and I love bar charts and pictograms because when it comes to displaying data that represents people, I thought that a pictogram would be a really neat way to do it. And one of the things that I thought about was using the image of people to show it. And then, of course, also in a bar chart because that's a great way to display numbers. But the other thing that I thought about too, and I'm using this a lot in my work in communications, is using an infographic because we wanted to be able to depict the quantitative and the qualitative data. And I think that using an infographic would be an interactive way to display the data, not only in a way that speaks to the numbers folks in the room, but also to the folks that may not have a good grasp of the numbers. And it would clearly communicate some of the challenges and some of the areas that they're strong in. So that was the answer for number 2. And number 3 was, excuse me, what team development interventions would you recommend? Design an intervention plan, including an agenda, timeline, and any suggested activities. So what I did was I just came up with a brief agenda, And then I added a timeline to it. So the first aspect of it was expectations. What should we stop, start, and continue? And I thought, and I just based the timeline on where we are currently in time. So I just said April 2018, that's something that would need to happen pretty soon to get an alignment around that. And then, of course, doing a strategic visioning session. And that would include just learning about the purpose, mission, and goals. So getting aligned and grounded. And that, of course, needs to come after all the expectations are established in the roles. And then one of the things that we talked about as a team was an employee appreciation event, because it's important for employees to feel appreciated and know where they stand in the company. So that's something that would definitely need to happen after the fiscal year, so around July 2018. And then, of course, team leads and team building, leadership development. This needs to be something that happens before that employee appreciation event, because once that event happens, the team needs to be able to hit the ground running and work with their teams better. And then the other thing that we talked about as a team was weekly team reviews and debriefs. So this would definitely be something ongoing weekly after the appreciation event. So Mike's going to talk a little more in depth about these recommendations and how we're going to implement these with the tactics.
Thanks, Jackie. So kind of taking what Jackie just mentioned and everything that we've kind of summarized. So going through the data, we did notice that there was a difference between what they were saying versus what their scores were. We also focused on how some of the questions in particular 4, 5, 9, and 11, they had such a wide array of answers. So there was from 1 to 5. So that tells us too that there's an inconsistency on how people are actually understanding their job functions, what they're doing together, and what's going to be happening. So taking with what Jackie just said and our recommendations as consultants moving forward, we do want everybody to the project manager to do a hard stop. This is something where it's not going to take too long, but going through and discussing everybody's role and what is actually expected of each individual person in the same room. So everyone can really understand why they're all there together. And then really the biggest point of that piece is to correlate how each and every job works together and why that's important. Because if they don't understand their expectations and you have this high performing team, but the moment that someone falls behind, it's more of like, give them to the wolves because, I have my own stuff to worry about. They start getting more into that team mentality. It can kind of help everyone push it a little forward. The ideas of going from good to great, really making sure that everyone's empowered to take care of each other as much as their own work. With that same piece, going through that same strategic visioning that Jackie mentioned. So what is our actual purpose? So as an organization, is everything that we're doing following up with our purpose? And if we're not following up with our purpose, why is it that we're doing it? And then making sure that that same piece with folks who fall behind, if you're focusing on stuff that isn't for your purpose, then you'd have a little bit more wiggle room to help other folks out. We did want to mention, like she mentioned, I believe July of this year, pushing through and thanking everyone for a job well done. So this is a high performing team, but it seems that, even though their scores are a little bit higher in the actual feedback that was provided, it shows that they don't feel that they're working hard, but they're not getting appreciated or they're not being at least recognized. So everyone has their own different type of feedback that they need, whether that's a good job, whether that's a bonus raise, however that's going to work. Really just for this one is hosting an event that's all inclusive during work hours. Now I know that's going to be a cost, which we'll talk about on the next slide here in a second, but doing it during work hours to let them know that, hey, we do appreciate what you're doing during work and that information. The other piece that kind of came out through the woodworks, or at least we pulled through the data, is that there's not a real overall team leader. So this organization is expected to work as a systems model, but there's really no one that's there to lead or be responsible for overall project management and people management. So making sure that the team is on the same page and moving forward in the right direction. Yes, they probably want that systems model, but you always need at least one person who's kind of helping ring everybody in. And then the last piece here is recommending that they host weekly meetings to review status of projects. And really this is to kind of go through with an accountability piece. So when folks are going through, everyone's responsible for giving a status report, whether that's just really quick or not. And if everyone goes around and says, nope, I'm all good, but there's other people who are waiting on certain aspects of their projects or their feedback, and we're able to kind of call each other out and say, hey, no, what about this? We were just talking about this. I still need an update on that. So we really kind of keep everybody on their toes. And then going through the case analysis questions that are provided on our Blackboard series, there's 4 or 5 main questions. So is there an alternative consistent with the organization's policies and procedures? So we're not really changing anything with the objectives, policies, and procedures. Like Dr. Lamb alluded to, we should probably look at the survey moving forward in the future for a cultural evaluation, changing that Likert scale to more of the 1 through 4 instead of 1 through 5. But we're not really changing our objectives or procedures. When it comes to cost for the overall organization, I do think this is rather low when it comes to an overall event. So when it comes to, it says estimated cost for 2,000 and time loss for 75. That's for the actual event. So if you think about how much you can show your associates, how much you appreciate them, it does look like a lot of money right there. But for this organization and the high performing team, it shouldn't really impact or really cause the company much of an issue. And then recommending small incremental steps that do not cost the company money. So this is where, can alternative and effective in time available to solve the problem. So with this, I did want to kind of just bring up one of the books that I just read, primarily for work. It's called The Spirit of the Kaizen. A Kaizen is just small incremental steps that lead to long change over time. So with this, I'm trying to go through and what is it that us as a company, what can we do in small steps that really doesn't create like a lot of disruption. So you can have this entire change over time that doesn't cost the company money. So prime example, if everybody kind of checks in with each other, takes 5 minutes and says, hey, do you need any help kind of thing. Those small incremental steps could lead to a higher performing team, even though they already are. But you can decrease that overall, leave them for the wolves kind of situation. We do believe this has a high probability of desired outcomes. 1, because it's not gonna cost the company a lot of money. And 2, it's just something where if they build the culture, they're already high performing. So if you really enhance that foundation, it could be a better situation for them. And there are no external constituents. It's all internal. So the last slide is just our resources. So we will open it up for questions.
Anybody have any questions here? Excellent presentation. I have a couple. Tell me if you agree with this statement. This is an effective team in spite of their leader, John. Do you agree or disagree with that question? That statement, excuse me. Do you agree or disagree?
I think they're a team that goes up. Sorry, so yes or no?
Yes or no, and then tell me why.
Yes, for the simple fact that they have the ability to meet their deadlines. But no, because the way that they're doing is really just dragging each other across the finish line.
What's the role of the leader here?
Facilitation and empowerment.
Communication. So the real issue here is the leader or the the positional power leader, John. It appears to me that John is basically running a team within a team. That's what the qualitative data tells me, that John is running a team within a team. He has a close group of associates that he shares information with and is his core group, but the larger group is not a part of that. That's kind of a team within a team. Why would you do something like that? Why as a leader would you organize your unit to be a team within a team? What might be some of the possible reasons that you would do that? Now, that's what the data tells us, is he's got a team. They call it a clique or a group. The data tells us, the qualitative data tells us that he's running a team within a team. Why would he do that?
Well, I think ideally the reason you would do that which I don't think he's using it for this purpose, is you can meet with your team, have a support there, like almost like a higher level management, and you can have a leadership team where big things are discussed, and then things from that meeting and that team are then disseminated throughout the rest of the team, communication-wise, strategy-wise, etc. But he's not using it in that capacity.
Well, then
I think he's using it as a safety net so he doesn't have to have hard conversations.
That's what I agree with that 1,000%. You don't have to have those critical conversations that way with the people who may not be your echo chamber. What's one of the bigger pitfalls that we fall into as leaders is, and we do it even on a larger scale in terms of where we get our news and information. We only tune into those sources that we agree with. We only interact with the employees that agree with us. Mm-hmm. And it becomes an echo chamber, what we used to call yes men and yes women. Mm-hmm. This person, John, is obviously running this organization that way. He only wants to be involved and interact and communicate with those who echo him. He doesn't want to hear from what he considers to be the opposition. Mm-hmm. So that's the first reason I think that John has done a team within a team. There's also another reason that's become popular within maybe the last 5 years or so. It's become a rather startling cultural phenomenon because of the prevalence of social media. I find that organizations and even units within organizations are now terrified of the possibility of information flowing out of the organization. Somebody expand on that for me, or am I the only one that senses that here? Are there examples in your own organization where maybe 10 years ago we wouldn't have acted as we do now, but because of the prevalence of videos, cell phones, social media, everybody's afraid now that information will get out of their organization that might not be positive? So what do I see it in organizations, a couple of organizations that I'm involved with? What are we now concerned about?
Well,
go ahead, Sheila.
I will tell you that it used to be that the leadership, we have a senior leader meetings that over 500 leaders and the CEO and the operating committee just talk to them frankly about the status of the organization, the direction of the organization, some strategies that we're going to take. And one of those leaders used their cell phone to video and record the meeting, and then gave it to the local newspaper.
Oh yeah.
And so now they have to sign, or there's confidentiality. If you get an email from me from work, you'll see a confidentiality statement that says that this information is for internal use only. If you've gotten this in error, please do not use. Or it may say it's under legal contract, so and the concern is, well, one is another organization stealing the idea, in our case, it is getting sensitive information that gets into the news. It's reputational damage. Mm-hmm. So the lack of actually, I think we should have been protecting ourselves in the first place. Mm-hmm. That's my opinion. But it's no longer the organization where everyone, you have a room of 600 people and we trust them all.
Right. Exactly. One of the reasons why running a team within a team has become very popular recently is just exactly what Sheila just talked about. I'm seeing that more and more in the organizations that I'm involved with. They're afraid that somebody's going to record it or give it to the media or put it on social media. If they'll see it on Facebook before they get home, that people will share it. And so there's this tendency now to hold information very tightly. And even though it might be somewhat public information, because they're not able to control the message or the spin that goes with it, folks are afraid that information can become publicly damaging, reputational. Things can be misinterpreted, misconstrued. And so the response to that, rather than communicate and set up boundaries and learn to live with social media and the media, folks are now starting to run cliques and groups and have groups within groups and committees within committees and those kinds of things. Mike, speak to that in terms of organizational effectiveness. You were talking about that a minute ago. If we go back to Mike's part.
So one of the examples, just with what you guys are just speaking about in organizational effectiveness, like I know with my project, the last session we got together, I spoke to Dr. Lamb about one of the issues with not being able or being told I'm not able to get a specific data set. So I want to know like the average tenure of our associates. And I was told outright by our senior HR managers, that's just not possible. So after speaking with Dr. Lamb, he told me that information should be readily available. Not really that hard to, pull where you have the start date and end dates. So I actually started pushing through the organization, just at my site level. I ended up finding someone who told me, oh yeah, we actually have that information. I can send it to you. So now I automatically, I'm starting to question, our senior leadership in the sense of why is it that we're holding that information? And two, why is it that you're not willing to share it with me? Part of it, I really believe that the individual who I originally asked, the most senior person, what we're doing here is we're learning how to manage the quants. So I have a feeling she literally just doesn't know how to do that stuff. But, part of me is also a little leery now. So when it comes to going through, our policies and procedures, really just trying to understand why aren't we sharing this information first? And then two, how can I make sure that I don't make that an external factor? So for my project, everyone is they're a little sketchy. They don't understand what I'm doing. And I think that's probably why.
And thank you for that, Mike. But that amplifies Sheila's point. It amplifies the points from this morning is that we really don't know how to handle media and social media now, and so our response is to put a limit on the information and data. We don't know how to deal with the quants. We design surveys that won't come out bad or good one way or the other because we're afraid of the numbers. We hold information tightly. We start running groups within a group. We become paranoid that information is going to leak out if we give it to the bigger group. I was in a meeting Friday before last of not a very big group. There was probably 112 people there, and they wanted information. And the leader of the group said, I'll be glad to share this with a small group, but I'm afraid that it will get out. Well, maybe some media training would help, because I'm afraid that answer's not going to satisfy that group. They said, we're all in this together and outcomes matter and we're being held accountable, but we don't know what the numbers are. Well, I'm afraid they'll get out if we give them to the larger group. Well, maybe some media training and maybe some training about quantitative numbers and maybe those kinds of things would help. I don't know. But what I do know is that group's not going to go away. They're not going to, that answer did not satisfy them. That only made them angrier. So to Mike's point, people become leery of why you're asking for data if they're still operating under the old model, and if they have not got training. I think Sheila made a good point. You may have to have people, you may have to tell people and work with them on how not to share and confidentiality of data and those kinds of things. But we live in a society where you can no longer run teams within teams, hold data to your chest, and expect outcomes to continue to be what you want them to be. That's just the truth of the matter is that you can do those old school things and hold that data, but your team effectiveness will eventually drop. See, one of the things that you have to understand is sometimes organizations succeed in spite of themselves, in spite of poor leadership, in spite of poor management, in spite of things. But there's always the backside of the cycle, as they call it in business, when things kind of peak out or plateau and they can only go down. And sometimes, the most incompetent management and leadership is still successful for a while because of market conditions. But then when those market conditions change, as they always do, we know there are cycles in business. That's when all of a sudden poor leadership and ineffective management, or vice versa, comes to bear. I mean, this is a highly functioning group. Back to the case study, this is a highly functioning group in spite of itself, in spite of the leader here. But this won't always happen. This won't always happen. When market conditions change or some key personnel change, then there's going to be problems. Mm-hmm. This is the kind of situation where you go from being highly effective to highly ineffective overnight. Mm-hmm. It's not a slow, precipitous decline. It's just like that. Because what happens to your most highly effective people in most any organization? One or two things happens, and neither one of them's good. They either get promoted,
they get moved on,
or somebody else gets them. And then
or they leave because they're frustrated.
Exactly. That's what I mean. Somebody else gets them, and somebody else can only get them if they're not happy with where they are.
Right.
They're not happy with where they are. Somebody else gets them, or they get promoted on up in the organization. And all of a sudden, those two or three key people that you were dependent upon to keep things going are no longer there. And then the rest of the group doesn't trust you, and you bring new people in and you're not sure if they're effective or not. And then all of a sudden, just like flipping a switch, you go from being highly effective to highly ineffective almost overnight. That unfortunately is corporate life 101. And so my overall recommendation, remember I'm the quantitative guy, my overall tendency in a case like this is new ox.
What did you say?
New ox.
Oh.
The Bible says if your ox is in the ditch on Sunday, it's an emergency. It's okay to get your ox out of the ditch. But if your ox is in the ditch every Sunday so that you can't go to church, you need to get you a new ox. Mm-hmm. And so I always use that analogy is that when we have a problem like this and it's an ongoing problem or ongoing emergency, that's not a one-off. That's not an emergency situation. That's the state of what is. And what we have to do there is we have to change the leader. Mm-hmm. It's in this case, my number one recommendation would be in this one, and this is hard. And why it's hard as a consultant is that the quantitative numbers don't look that bad, but the survey was set up so that they wouldn't look that bad. The qualitative data tells us a completely different story. I mean, even the positive comments tell us there's a team within a team here. This is a dysfunctional group.
Yes.
I mean, every one of those, in my opinion, every one of those qualitative statements is damning to the leader. It's very clear. There's a team within a team here. And so, you know, I'm not sure that you can change that about this leader without alienating all the team members. I know that's drastic, and the quantitative numbers don't really look that bad, but they were designed not to look that bad. The qualitative information in this case tells us the story, because every one of those comments, and I've got them pulled up over here on this computer. If you're a member of John's Inner Circle, it's a fine team. If otherwise, you'll be ignored. We don't support one another as a team. We wait till John makes decisions announcing them. But then even the people that in his inner circle say, John's a great leader. We have great potential, but some negative members of the team, that even the person that's trying to support John acknowledges that we have a team within a team, that we've got this other group over here that, you know, the booger eaters that sit over at the other table, pardon my analogy. And then I wish I knew more about what members of the team are doing. That's the child's table. The team is cliquish. I mean, every one of those statements is a negative. Every one of them. Every one of those statements is a negative. However, because we set up our survey so that the numbers wouldn't look bad on a chart or a graph, back to Jackie's point, our infographic is not going to look that bad on the hard numbers because we set it up not to look bad. And if we had actually done it, set up our data collection methodology the correct way, what we would have seen is a bunch of real bad numbers from the child's table and a bunch of really good numbers. And we would have seen, oh, this is not a team, this is two teams or two groups that are pretending to be a team. That's what our quantitative data should have told us. That's what our qualitative data tells us very clearly, that there's two separate, at either end of the spectrum, the range as we call it, that our people are at either end of the range. But our quantitative data is right in the middle because we allowed it, we set it up to be right in the middle. We use poor methodology here, but we probably intentionally did that so that our hard numbers wouldn't look that bad. We found what we wanted to find. We do that way too much in organizations. We don't want the numbers to look bad, so we find what we want to find. And we ignore and we only highlight what we think are positive comments in the qualitative, but are actually just as damning, or even more so. So in this particular case study, the real richness of data that tells us the actual story is the qualitative. The quantitative is useless here. It was set up to be useless. That was the intent. We were holding the scale in the middle so that it couldn't go one way or the other. But you will see this more than you will see any other quantitative data methodology. You will see it this way more than the right way, and it's specific, and there's a purpose for that. Okay. Unfortunate, but that's corporate. That's the way many corporate entities function. You as a consultant need to understand and recognize that right away, especially when you go into an organization as a leader or a consultant and they try to give you data that they've already collected. It will be just as confusing as this will be. All right. Excellent job. Excellent. All of you. I loved all the points that you made. Jackie, I'd like to know more about infographics in terms of what you do with those. That intrigues me. I think that would be something I'd be interested in seeing. All right, who's next?
We'll go. Daryl and Lisa and Sheila.
All right. Participants.
But you're going to give me the control.
I am Sheila. All right, I've reclaimed the host. I am now going to make Sheila the host. All right, and then I am going to okay.
I can share now?
Yes, you can.
Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Great. Okay, so Daryl, Lisa, and I are the team that worked on this. And let's hope this works. Come on, move. Okay, slide. Can't get this thing to move. I don't know what this problem is today. Oh, there we go.
There you go.
So here's,
Oops.
one too far. Let me go back. Sorry. So just before I get into the summary, we had no background about this company in terms of its culture, what type of organization it is. We take the information from the qualitative data that says John is the team leader, but we really don't know his hierarchy in the organization. There are 12 people who answered the survey. We don't know if that's the full team number of the team, and that's not counting John. And then when we talk about as Lisa will continue with this, when we talk about production, we don't know what it produces. So we're not thinking manufacturing when we say that. We're just talking about whatever they produce. So keep that in mind. And we also broke it up into their mission or goals and organizational culture. So we know that team members are consistent and aligned in their answers to the production or mission related questions, and team members are not aligned in their answers to the organizational culture related questions. So we broke the questions out to determine so that we can do an analysis of the data, of the quantitative data. So what we did here is we put a chart together just to demonstrate or show, and I'm not going to go into the detail of this because Lisa's going to do it as she talks about the data, but we have the questions around mission, clear understanding of the team, and contributes to the organizational goals as what we're calling production. And then the culture are the other items around satisfaction, being proud of the team, effectiveness, those types of things in the organization. So I'm going to turn this over to Lisa, who's going to talk about some of the data.
Right. So just look at the legend for a minute because I flipped the chart just a little bit. So the coral, everything over to the left is the compilation between people that disagree or strongly disagree. Then the goldenrod color is those that agree or strongly agree combined. And then the mint is those that neither agree nor disagree. So that column that Dr. Lamb wants us to stay away from, or our careers will be in the toilet. So if we go to the questions that we really think that needed focus, the first category of focus for us was the one that spoke to proud to be a member of the team. So if you look at the chart, it looks fairly split, but I think that what's really telling, or what we decided was really telling, is that if we're assuming that the team that answered these questions is a full 12 people, 2 people didn't even answer that. So, you know, to Dr. Lamb's point earlier, if you don't want to take the survey, then just don't answer it. And it's to us, it almost spoke to possibly 2 people that were so afraid to answer this question that they chose not to, considering that they answered every other question, even though they answered it in a very wimpy way to say they neither agreed nor disagreed. If you look at the next one where it talks about team meetings are effective, clearly people do not agree with that. And then you look at, the 5 people that chose not to give an opinion. That even though people have that opportunity to answer within that column, which, we now know they shouldn't have that on a survey, that speaks to either they can't make a decision, or they're afraid to make a decision, or they feel like they need to answer the survey, but they don't. So that's a really important one to us. And then the handling the conflict openly is divided, but the most telling one is the team members encourage each other. So if you look at that one, they either disagree overall or they chose not to answer, which says a lot, again, about the culture.
All right, hold 1 second. Lisa, pardon me 1,000 times over. I love this graphic. If we take and add the numbers in mint to the lowest number on each of these, what we find is exactly what we were talking. This is 2 teams. This is a team within a team. 6 and 6 split down the middle.
Right.
That's what, if we had forced these people to pick a side, we would have found that they're almost 6 and 6.
Right.
Split. Perfect. Thank you for this wonderful graphic.
Sheila, you can advance it now.
Okay.
So then for the qualitative data summary, when we looked at all of those responses, the way that we interpreted it was we try to give you some sort of a ratio. So if we look at the anything else that you would like to add, which I kind of do want to flip this a little bit. When Dr. Lamb was saying that this survey was designed to not really come up with the hard stuff because they were giving people an out, then if that was they made a big mistake, I think, by letting people have a qualitative piece of it, because then people then replied. So 3 out of the 7 comments specifically mentioned John. 1 out of those 3 comments that mention John can skew positive towards him if you look at the connotations of the comments. 5 out of the 7 of those comments have negative connotations, whether they're implied or explicit. 1 out of the 7 of those comments can skew positive if you just read the surface of it. And then 1 out of the 7 comments could be viewed as neutral. In that comment, I think the one that we said could be viewed as neutral is, I would like to see us make more decisions by consensus. It was kind of, wishy-washy as to not terrible, but not really great. So it could be viewed as neutral.
All right. Again, 1,000 pardons. Lisa just struck upon the kind of the central theme of this case study. I considered all of the qualitative to be negative toward the lead. All of it.
Right.
But if you look at but we can't show that in a graph with numbers with a chart up on the board. It's just qualitative, it's just narrative. But the actual numbers that would catch somebody's eye or attention, we made sure that they were neutral, that they didn't show us anything. But you're exactly right. They made the mistake here of allowing people to comment. So if somebody is actually paying attention to this data and not just looking for a visual that says good or bad, and that's basically what we do with visuals, good or bad, they would see this is all bad. But we intentionally designed the actual numbers that we can put into a chart or a graph, or especially a pie chart. And we intentionally made those where there's nothing that just smacks us in the face with our numbers, with our graphic. But and that had to be intentional. Proceed again.
Okay.
Off my sermon, my soapbox here.
Sheila, I'm good.
Okay, so we'll turn this over. Daryl?
Yes. Okay. So basically, from the information that we gathered from the quantitative and the qualitative data, we were able to try to correlate that with what we see as the different stages of team development. So as you see on the graph below, there are 6 stages of team development, from forming to storming, norming, performing, adjourning, and next steps. And based off of the information that we were able to synthesize, again, like Sheila mentioned before, we don't really have the context or a lot of context as to the specifics of the organization or the team. But based off the information that was presented within the case study, we felt that they are more in the storming aspect, which is reality is setting in, their frustration, they have dissatisfaction, adjustment, anxiety, things of that nature. And yeah, so that's pretty much where we are, or how we are feeling as far as the stages of team development. The next thing is the consultant's diagnosis. So this kind of goes back to that first question that was on the case study, as far as what are the strengths, what are the areas of improvement, things, etc. So some of the strengths that we acknowledged were, overall, the group understands the mission of the team. And this is coming based off of either the qualitative or the quantitative, or both. Overall, the individuals understand their role on the team. Overall, the individuals know how the team contributes to the organizational goals. They believe the goals of the team are clear, and they constantly achieve the team's goals. They always are on top, and that came directly from the qualitative. On the other hand, some areas of improvement are, they know what the goals are and where they want to go, but they don't know how to express their opinion, even if it means conflict. So as we saw within the data, that there was some concerns about, how do I express myself without being in a conflicting manner. They do not believe the team really supports each other's efforts. So one of the qualitatives that we pulled said, I wish I knew more about what other members of the team are doing. Individuals do not take initiative. They wait for John to make the decisions. That also came from some qualitative things. That's like, we don't take initiative. We just wait for John to make the decision, and that's what we do. And then a question that we had was, has John directed whoever created the survey as to exactly what is needed to evaluate the program? So do we know exactly what the intention of the survey is? What are we trying to really get from the information that we're trying to gather throughout the survey? And so the next part is the timeline. So as a result of these strengths in the areas of improvement, we as a team said, okay, so what can we do, or what can we suggest as a timeline or some activities for the team to be able to participate in? And so some of those was step 1 was meeting with John to understand the needs, to get to know him. In addition to reviewing the data and sharing recommendations. Then step 2, if John approves and makes the adjustments to the recommendations, he communicates with the team within 30 days after meeting with the consultants. After that, the consultants are going to meet with the team to review the data with them and assess the group within those 30 days. So as you see, we're going from not just meeting with John individually, we're also meeting with the team individually. And then step 4, based on the assessment and the data, from the survey of qualitative and qualitative comments, we're going to design the next steps to improve the dynamics of the team. So we're going to actually start beginning to make a plan of how we're going to address some of the issues that are within it. Step 5, within 90 days, survey the team to see areas of improvement and areas that still need attention. So kind of reassessing. And then last but not least, provide gaps to John and guidance on how to, again, because we assume that John is a leader based off the information, provide gaps to John and guidance on how to continue the process to move the team to high performing and forward.
So one of the things that we deducted was that there's not a lot of trust in this group. And so this is the trust model, Tory model, by Jack Gibb, and it's also a model for group development. And so as we would be talking to John, what we're assessing is that people go right to stage 3, which is what are we going to do together and how we're going to do it. But the team may not know each other or had an opportunity to express who they are with each other. And so, for instance, this may be on a personal level, but also on a work level. So, you know, to understand their line of sight more, if I know that what I make helps you put your part together so that we form a widget at the end for the customer, then it's really important for me to understand your job, not only to understand mine. So to bring some trust and membership in here, and also openness around, you know, what is the decision making? What is the communication process? How do we share our information with each other will help us. And it's our assumption that if they do those two steps, then even though they see that or seem to be highly productive in knowing their mission and what they want to do for the organization, that this will also propel it further. Okay, so here are our references, but I really want to tell you that we have a detailed, we have an appendix with the various, and we're not going to go through that because it's several pages, of the detail of the activities that are on the timeline. So I'm going to try to go back to that. I'm sorry. Here we go. That if you wanted to read them further, you could, but we didn't want to clog up the PowerPoint with those. So, ready for questions.
Let's go back to your Tory model again.
Okie dokie. There you are.
Trust, acceptance, trust, openness, realization, interdependence. Okay. So let's look at the unresolved. Fear and distrust, caution and inauthenticity, apathy and competition, dependence and power struggle. All right. So my question is, looking at this model, looking at the unresolved, and which is basically, the bad part.
Right.
What's wrong with having two teams? If you got 12 people, what's wrong with having two teams of 6 with a 12-person department? What looking at this, what can be our problem when we got 2 teams of 6?
I'll chime in with that because I think that it's the first step and the third step that, well, actually, I mean, all of them have their issues when you're looking at the unresolved parts. But if you don't have the trust at the very beginning, then you immediately have that. If the leader of the organization or the leader of the team doesn't set up that trust or that way to, when people are kind of storming, and that storming part, if we go back to our other graphic, if they are not clear about good team development and they don't set up expectations to then build that trust, then you start out with the fear and distrust, and people inside the team are trying to look for who they trust, and they're automatically setting up this divide amongst themselves because they're in that competition phase, the unresolved, the apathy and competition. They end up competing with each other to just survive because they don't have somebody strong at the top trying to help them manage all of that. There's constant caution about who can I trust? Can I go to you? Are you trying to usurp my authority? Are you working behind my back? And that turns into that power struggle within, because if you're not getting that clarity from the leader at the top, then, and you don't really know where you stand and you're not strong enough to feel like you have that independence, you're constantly trying to seek that in other ways, and that is just not healthy. So,
and if I can add, so there is no, to your question, Dr. Lamb, the group is not interdependent. Some of them are dependent on John to give the information, and on each other. So this could lead to this power struggle between the work. Again, we don't have a lot of data in this case, but I would assume that in addition to what Lisa said, that they are not interdependent totally, which for me means that they're not working at their highest and best use for the organization.
And then if we use the quants book, when we talk about using the survey as a story, we're not judging this data any more than using it to make decisions of focus. So again, to Sheila's point, and to what Daryl said earlier, like we don't know a lot, but what that qualitative data shows us is that people are either uber supportive or they're brave enough to make the comment because they think it's going to be anonymous, that this is clicks, and if you're not in the in-group, you're out. So, we look at this and try to tell the story, and we know that this team is dysfunctional, but it does have some really good parts about it. And in our appendix, we talk about the fact that, we do need to, if the option is to not get a new ox and we are stuck with John, because who knows, again, we don't know anything and we don't know who's making these decisions. We're assuming that all we can do is answer to John, and that's what we based our information on. If we can't replace him with a different ox, then we do need to make sure that he does see that some of the things that are happening are very positive. Like for whatever reason, and I think it goes back to what you said earlier, they are functioning in spite of him. And that probably has to do with the fact that you've got some very high functioning people that either he hired or that happened to be there before he came or just landed there for whatever reason that are forcing this team to continue to make their goals. But it's not a happy place to be. And so therefore, because the culture is so poor, people are going to fall off. You don't quit your job, you quit your boss. So
that's right.
I think this Tory model we think this Tory model is really important because of how it just outlines very clearly what happens inside of a team when you don't start with that trust.
Lisa's point, you don't quit your job, you quit your boss. Goes back to Hertzberg, satisfier and dissatisfier. The leader can't be a satisfier, can only be a dissatisfier. You quit your boss. If they're not already there, they're going to get to competition. There's definitely the data shows us clearly there's two groups here. And so if the competition has not already started, it will shortly because of what Sheila just said. These are highly competent and effective people.
Right.
They're going to become two competing groups if they're not already there. They're going to become competing groups. That's not good within your organization. When you let one group compete and cannibalize another group, or they're fighting among themselves all the time, then you can't get, if your focus is inward among yourselves, you can't get going in the direction that you need to be going as an organization.
Well, the other example too is that people may come to work and quit. So, they're coming to work and they're doing the motions, and six people are working their tail off, getting the results, and the other six are saying, look, he didn't want me to be, to contribute. I'm just going to collect my paycheck.
Right.
Exactly. And sometimes, that's what I was talking about earlier, sometimes organizations, because of the market conditions and market forces, succeed in spite of themselves. Right. But then those will always change. Now, all of a sudden, you've got these people who are coming to work every day, half of this team, but they've already quit. Market conditions change, and you go from being highly successful to highly unsuccessful overnight.
Right.
It's just that quick. This is a textbook case of dysfunction. That's going to lead to competition, and going to lead to ineffectiveness down the road very, very quickly here. Now, we keep talking about John. Can we work with John if new ops is not an option, can we work with John to fix this? Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think so. First of all, I don't know what support, and again, we don't have all this data. So, if John is in a pressure cooker and he needs to get done what he needs to get done, we don't know what support he's getting from his leader. We have to assess his skills and what he's willing to do. That's why in our meeting, we said we would talk with him, present our recommendations, and then see what he would add in so that he took ownership of this. I think once we met with him, we would be able to tell whether or not he was up for the challenge. But the data doesn't tell us anything about him, his boss, the organization, so it makes it very hard. So I'm always I believe that my strength finders, one of my top scores is individualization. So I always look for the good in people and what they can do. And I think that there's a possibility for John. There's nothing that says there's not a possibility for John yet. So I think we can work with him. And I think he has, just like the rest of this team, there's opportunity for improvement.
I was going to grab my copy of Strength Finder, but that's okay. We got to move on time wise here.
Sorry, didn't mean to do that.
So we've kind of come to the kernel of truth in this one, which is this is all about John. This is not really about the organization. This is really about John. What we've got to now we've kind of come to the kernel of truth that we find in all of these case studies is this case study is about John. Remember I told you, I continue to tell you and beat this same old drum and wear you out with, I'm not trying to train you to be a quant. I'm trying to train you to be a leader that employs quants and to be able to use that data. I said that to say this. As a leader of this organization, you need to understand that this is about John. And the decision boils down to, do we replace John, or do we believe that John has the capacity to change? This is completely dysfunctional. Yes. Organizations can't survive with this level of dysfunctionality. Market conditions will change. The sun doesn't shine on the same dogs behind all the time. Market conditions will change. And you will go from being highly effective to highly ineffective overnight with leadership like this, at whatever level it is. It's obviously, a fairly lower level in the organization since there's only 12 people. I would assume that, that this is a fairly lower level employee that only is directing 12 people. But it may be in an organization of 1,000 or 100, but it doesn't matter. This is a textbook case of dysfunctionality from the leadership perspective. Creating a team within a team is never good. That's the first sign that things are getting ready to go really, really bad. When you start developing competition among yourselves where you can't understand that your real competition is from outside market forces, from the next company down the block, that's your real competition. And if you're fighting among yourselves all the time, you can't marshal your forces to get going in the same direction and fight your real competition, which is the next guy, the next company, the next corporate entity. You cannot survive this sort of dysfunctionality at any level of your organization and survive very long. You just can't. So this is about John. That's what the data tells us. This is about John. It's not about the vision, the mission. It's not about processes or organizational. This is about John. It's all about John. All right. Very good. Very good. All right. Who's next?
All right. You can give me the parents.
Okay, Terrence, I have made you the host.
Okay. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, we can. Excellent.
All right. I'm going to turn it over to Sheldon.
Okay, good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
STK has been brought in as a consulting group to do a team diagnosis and intervention. And so this morning we're going to be reviewing some of the facts of our analysis, some of also the learning objectives, and we're going to identify what we feel to be the central problem. In addition to the central problem, what are some of the secondary problems? Meaning that if we were to make improvements to the central problem, we want to make sure that the secondary problem is not impacted in a negative way. And we're going to come up with, there have been some solutions that we've identified that that maybe can work, and we've also selected one preferred solution. And we're going to end with the plan for implementation, and hopefully we'll have time for a few questions. We've been given a survey that's been previously done, which actually included 12 team members that were surveyed for their feedback on team effectiveness. The survey contained both quantitative feedback as well as qualitative feedback. The 12 team members responded on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being strongly disagree to 5 being strongly agree. 11 quantitative questions were asked, and at the end of the survey, there was 1 qualitative question that was asked, which was, anything else you would like to add? And you will see from our findings, even though there was only 1 qualitative question that was asked, that provided a lot of insight to what we believe are the central issues of the organization. So our objectives from a learning standpoint is basically how to look at both the quantitative side as well as the qualitative results and of feedback that you receive and how they can be implemented for organization change. And also to understand the impact of both quantitative as well as qualitative feedback, and not to discount one or the other. And also how to basically prioritize what areas you're going to improve when you receive mixed feedback. So from a strength standpoint, based on the feedback from the survey, and this is basically on the quantitative side, 86% of the team members indicated based on the survey that they understand how the team contributes to the organization's overall goals. So we find that to be a strength. 76% of those surveyed believe that the mission of the team is also clear. So that's another strength. In addition to that, 78% of the members feel that decision-making practices are effective. And finally, the last strength, we found that 66% of the team members, which is basically 2/3, are satisfied with their jobs. From a weakness standpoint, looking at the quantitative feedback, 54% of team members believe that conflict is handled openly. So that's, we feel, is not a very good number, when basically a little more than half feel that conflict is handled in an open manner. Less than 50% of the team feel that they are encouraging each other to do their best. So that, to us, shows a lack of support for team members. And 40% of the team members surveyed, they are not proud to be a member of the team. That's a pretty significant number when 40%, almost half of your team members don't feel proud. And a third of the team members indicated that they're not satisfied with their job. So we see this to be weaknesses within the organization. So in addition to the quantitative data that we've reviewed for strengths and weaknesses, we also got some good insight from the qualitative side. I mentioned to you earlier that there was a question about, is there anything else you'd like to add? Well, here's some of the feedback that was received. One, we consistently achieve our goals and are always at the top. John is a great leader, but negative team members bring the team down. Okay, so that's one side. The other side indicated that the team is fine if you're in John's inner circle. Otherwise, you are ignored. We don't support each other is another comment. And also, I don't think anyone has my back. In addition to that, I'd like to see us make decisions by consensus. And another comment that came was, I wish I knew more about what others were doing. Team meetings are too brief. So clearly from the qualitative data, we see that there are two sides to the coin. One side feels that, things are going great and that John is a great leader, but they also recognize there are people outside of the group, outside of the clique, if you will. And you can see the comments from the people that are themselves not in the inner circle. So that's both the quantitative and the qualitative side. I know we've talked about a lot of percentages and statistics. I'm going to turn it over to Terrence to really just from a graphic standpoint to talk about some of the illustrations and the view from a graphic and chart standpoint.
And very briefly, and we've already seen a lot of different designs of the chart, but anytime that you need to present data to your audience, visuals are always helpful. Whether the team is only consists of 2 people or your audience is, a much larger base, but nevertheless, visuals are always good. And so this basically illustrates what Sheldon has already shared with us with the percentage of team contribution, those who believe that the mission is clear, feel decision-making is effective and satisfied with their jobs. We also illustrate the weaknesses as well, using the same type of chart. And in our text, we saw the various charts that can be used for various data. In this type of scenario, we felt that the chart would be the most appropriate because it shows us the comparison in the various areas or in the different areas. And then with graph charts, you're able to see over the course of time what type of change has occurred. So this seems to be, again, the best graphics for this type of data analysis. All right, at this time, that Katie will come.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. So we decided that the central problem is that communication is not flowing evenly among both sets of teams, and the team members that aren't in the group are not engaged with the team members inside the circle, and vice versa. As a result, the survey indicated that there are issues with conflict management, and there is a lot of lack of encouragement amongst the 2 separate teams. And job satisfaction and a sense of pride are negatively impacted as a byproduct. Some secondary problems from this is that whatever solution we decide to address the problem, it could cause a decrease in satisfaction for the employees that previously reported that they were satisfied. And 78% already feel that decision-making practices are already effective. And then relationships could be damaged as cliques are broken up. So we looked at some solutions. We could replace all of the dissatisfied employees, replace John and hire a new manager, get a new ops, or we could implement an intervention that facilitates the flow of communication and increases engagement and accountability for all of the employees. And we're kind of operating on the assumption here, not knowing a lot about John or the team members, that maybe this divisiveness was not intentional from John. It was just something that happened. Maybe it could be a personality issue or something that all of them could be coached through. So we were kind of operating on that assumption when we picked our preferred solution, which is to implement the intervention that would facilitate a better flow of communication and more of a sense of team among all of the team members instead of having them broken apart. So our plan for intervention or plan for implementation, we want to have a feedback session where we go over the results of the survey and the qualitative data. And so my team went back and forth a little bit with what that feedback session looks like. How direct do we need to be with people during the feedback session? We definitely want to set goals and then have some indicators or benchmarks for areas that we want to approach as a team and move forward in that direction. We want to introduce communication strategies and interventions, and we want to do that by having a retreat and introducing some team building activities at the retreat. And then we want to schedule routine team meetings that are more involved and structured so that everyone has a sense of being able to converse back and forth without any conflict. And then we want to finalize that by doing a follow-up survey to measure how effective the interventions actually were. So I'm going to let Sheldon talk a little bit about, we use Tuckman's model of group development, and Sheldon actually does some training on this. So Sheldon, do you want to kind of take over this one?
Okay, sure, Katie, thank you. As Katie mentioned about at the retreat, we would certainly want to do some team building exercises. And certainly, Bruce Tuckman was a psychologist who came up with the 4 or sometimes 5 stages of group development. And of course, there are forming, which is the first stage, which is when the group comes together and basically you're introduced. And then, of course, a natural stage next is the stage of storming. And that's basically when there's some conflict. And during the storming stage, you have people that have different views about conflict. There's a view of conflict, which is considered the traditional view of conflict that some people may hold, which means that if there's an issue, if there's conflict, you avoid it. So that's one view, and that has been considered a traditional view of how people deal with conflict, is to certainly, if you see it, just ignore it and avoid it. There's also another view of conflict that says that conflict is natural. It's inevitable. It's going to happen, so you should embrace it. So when it happens, don't be surprised that there are differences of opinions, differences of how to handle or approach issues. And then, of course, there's a final view of conflict, which says that if no conflict exists in a group, create some, meaning if there's not a problem, create a problem, just so you make sure that you get the optimal solution and you cannot just go along. Because if you have people that are not willing to speak up, and you may sometimes have a false sense of security for your solutions because there was no conflict. And that view is basically considered the interactionist view of conflict. So the reason I'm talking about the storming phase of group development, if you got different personalities and they handle conflict differently, 1, by avoiding it, 2, the second group may be the group that embraces it, or there's another group that says, okay, we need to make sure we have it. Sometimes when you don't have the storming stage, if it does not happen, groups may move on and they may perform, but you will certainly still come back. You have more like a bump in your rug, if you will. It doesn't go away. So the storming phase is very, very important, and I think very necessary for groups to really perform at the highest level. And then, of course, the third stage is basically when the groups comes together and they start agreeing on rituals and how they're going to do business. And the fourth stage is performing. So the reason we wanted to talk about this at the retreat, because this would be more of an indirect way of letting the group know that they may not necessarily be unlike other groups, that if you have conflict, it's natural, it's okay. Let's get the feedback from the people that have differences of opinions or don't feel a part of the group. Let's embrace the conflict and not just avoid it and continuing to perform and do business without including everyone. So this will be something we certainly want to do. And this may hopefully be a way to bring the team together, bring everybody into the inner circle. Katie?
Okay. And so we developed a timeline for implementing the intervention. We want to look at the next 3 months. So we did the initial survey, and we're going to have the feedback session. And then over the course of the next several months, we'll do the retreat and then implement the meeting schedule with more structured meetings. And then at the end of this time period, we'll do the follow-up survey. And then after the intervention, the post-survey will help indicate whether the intervention was successful. Qualitative data from the survey will also direct any further intervention. So we can ask questions like, you know, what are some other, what worked for you, what didn't work for you, so we can get that qualitative data. But we also want to look at some other sources like retention rates, absences, and tardiness, so we can get a more objective data set, looking at some more indirect values there. And then finally, we looked at 3 questions on the initial survey. How to be a member of this team, team members handle conflict openly, and team members encourage each other to do their best. And you know, we talked about earlier that we really can't find a correlation because of that neutral column there. But what we would like to see is that a negative correlation between proud to be a member of this team and handling conflict and encouraging each other with the post survey. And then I think that's about it for us. We have our reference for Tuckman's theory, and we'll take any questions.
I have a question. Am I muted?
No, you're
Okay.
good, Lisa.
Sheldon, can you go back to the storing part and when you said if no conflict exists, create some or create one? Are you talking about during the training phase or the retreat of what the ideal is to train is to, like, in a closed environment, in a hypothetical situation, create a conflict so that you get the members to work through that while you're there to facilitate that so they understand how to work through conflict? I'm not sure about the, I understand the first 2 points, but I don't understand the third point.
Yeah. The third point is basically a view that there's a perspective around when you're in the storming phase, when the group first comes together.
Yeah.
And you're trying to, and there again, if there is no conflict, sometimes before you move to the norming stage and the performing, create some conflict. That conflict is necessary. Basically, that's the view, that you need to teach people how to deal with conflict. If there's never any conflict, and if everyone all of a sudden has the traditional view that, oh, we don't have any issues, we all think alike, we're moving forward, and you never learn how to deal with conflict.
Right.
So basically, that view is typically from a group development when the group's first coming together. Make sure before you move to the norming and performing stage that you have some conflict exercise so that people start to, relate that we need to anticipate that we may have conflict in the future, and we need to develop a good process for working through it.
Okay, I understand. So it's
That's
from
considered interaction.
it's the training standpoint, or it's the awareness of the leader, rather than, you're not saying that if a team seems to be moving along just fine, that inevitably somebody will create a conflict because that's part of the storming.
No, not at all. In fact, the storming phase is early on, when this is the second phase that happens after a group initially forms. So once the group comes together, so this, in theory, this should happen early on before the group performance stage.
Gotcha. Okay.
Because if you don't do it, you will, at some point, when you get to
come right back,
you still have some issues that you never resolved.
Right. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Excellent presentation. All right. Is John a transformational or a transactional leader?
Transactional.
Transactional, from what we can see.
Transactional, absolutely. John is a transactional leader. Now, I'll play the devil's advocate for a minute here. I'm a member of the not in crowd. I'm one of the 6 that don't belong to John's group. My question to Sheldon is, and this could be to anybody, why should I have to go through all this self-reflection and staff development and organizational team build? Why should I have to go through all this when John's the problem?
I think that in the team building, our approach was to have John in the retreat, have John with the help of maybe from us as consultants, facilitate a process where the leader becomes realized and recognized that everyone needs to be on the team. Everyone needs to be in the inner circle. And so it's going to start at the top with John. I agree with the fact that if someone's on the outside and feels that way, that they should not necessarily have to do anything. The whole issue of recognizing that there's conflict, if you can speak to that at the top of the house, that, hey, we're going to have some conflict. We recognize that some people don't feel as valued or as included. So we want to make sure everyone is involved, everyone's embracing the goals of the organization, and everyone's participating and giving input and feedback. So I think John needs to take the lead and bring everyone into the inner circle, not the other way around. I don't think you need to push your way into the inner circle. So we would start with John and help, but we would also, for the people that are outside the circle, let them know that that conflict is natural in a group, that people are going to think differently. Some people avoid it, some people embrace it. So we want to just acknowledge that we need to do a better job of handling differences of opinions, and that we need to make sure we engage everyone.
So I believe that you're exactly right, Sheldon, that there's going to need to be some group work done here. But the first thing we need to do is do some work with John to assess whether he's capable,
absolutely,
or willing to go forward. I know of a situation in an organization right now that's very dysfunctional. Not the one that I work at, but one that I have one of my former graduates works in. And what they're doing is working with the leader to begin with, which is, they're doing it the right way. They're working with her to begin with to see if she has the capacity. She inherited a dysfunctional organization. They knew it when she was there. She's been there a short period of time. Now they're working with her to see if she has the capacity to lead and to do the things that need to be done. And part of the reason why that organization is doing that is to one, make sure she's the right person for the task, but two, to show the people in the organization, we're not just blaming you. and we're going to make sure this is the right person, that they have the right characteristics, that we've done staff development with them first, and then they're going to lead you through. If they're the right person, then they will lead you through these critical processes as a transformational leader. And so it goes back again to John. The central question here is John the right person or not? Do we get a new person? And so we have to do some staff development with John, but we have to make a decision fairly quickly here.
And to that point, John's view of conflict may be to avoid it. And that's
well, obviously it is. That's why you form two groups. And that's how I started this today. That's why you form an echo chamber, because you don't want to hear the opposing group. You don't want to hear that. You don't want to deal with that conflict. So you insulate yourself inside your own group of yes people that are an echo chamber for you. That's exactly what's happened here. Is obviously John doesn't want to deal with conflict. I mean, that's self-evident here. Mm-hmm. Right. And we've got to find out if John has the capacity to do that. John may not have the capacity. If we look at the characteristics of a transactional leader, constrained thinking discourages independent thinking because it leads to conflict and doesn't echo what you believe. Resistance to change. These are all textbook characteristics of a transactional leader. Punishes and rewards, extrinsic motivations, motivates them externally with punishment and reward, passive aggressive. Those are all characteristics of a transactional leader. We can't just wave a magic wand and make John a transformational leader that understands inspiration and motivation. John may not have the capacity. So we need to work with John to begin with. And then if John has the capacity, we'll help him to lead his group through some of these exercises and the dynamics of these exercises. But the first thing we have to figure out is, does John have the capacity? So this, again, goes back. The central question is, if John, we understand now, it's clear from the data that John is a transactional leader. What we need to be able to determine is, does John have the capacity to be a transformational leader? I mean,
I agree.
Again, we obviously need to work our organization, the 12 team members, through a process of team building, obviously. But John may not be the person to do that. John has shown no proclivity to that so far, according to the data, that, because John's just outcomes based and we're performing it at right. Whatever level we are in spite of him, that's all John cares about so far. Does he have the ability to change, or does he see the efficacy in change? I mean, John may be one of those people who says, if it ain't broke, why fix it? Well, because it's going to break shortly.
Right.
John, we need to know if John has the capacity to change. And does he understand that what he's doing is not good organizationally? See, John may argue that, since we're meeting our goals and objectives, mm-hmm. We're meeting our production quota, what's the problem? Mm-hmm. He may not see that, it's not that people are not self-aware. John may believe that this is a way to get the most results, punish and reward. But it's a whole lot easier to go the transformational, which has replaced John, than the transactional, which is fire half of his team.
With no background on the culture of the organization, and he may very well be in a manufacturing drive for results.
But the takeaway from this exercise is, this is about John. Yes, we have things that we need to do with the organization, but the central question of this case study is John. Does John have the capacity to be a transformational leader or not? The data has clearly defined him as a transactional leader, clearly defined. And that's kind of the trick of this one is the quantitative data is not damning. It's the qualitative data that is 100% again. It says that he's a transactional leader. 100%. Every one of those is, even the ones that are supposed to be positive, support the notion that he's running two groups here: the in crowd and the out crowd. Punishing.
I'm sorry.
Go right ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think this, so without the data, John could have been one of the previous workers who was put into the role because he was excelling at the work he was doing and not given the leadership capabilities, not capabilities, but the leadership development that he needed to do the job. There are so many things that are missing in this case. So I don't know. And again, you know me, I think there's hope because we don't know that there isn't any hope for John.
Yeah, but that's why we have to assess John. That's exactly right. That's our first task, is we got to assess John.
Right. And typically people who are doing well in organizations are promoted from a transaction to a leader without filling that gap.
Exactly. We've got to find out if he may have assumed this transactional situation. What we've got to determine is, does he have the capacity to become transformational? He may have been thrust in this role. We promote people that are great salespeople to sales managers, and they're two completely different things.
Absolutely.
He may not have the skill set to be the manager or to be the leader. That's what we have to determine first. Our data establishes that we have a dysfunction here. As Sheldon was talking about in the team, the data has established that we have a dysfunction. We're obviously going to have to do some team building. We're going to have to address conflict and those kinds of things. But what we don't know is if John is the person to do that. The central theme is John. Go ahead.
Can I jump in on this as well? I think, too, it would matter if we're talking about a small, self-sustaining organization where John is the top of the food chain, so to speak. Mm-hmm. I think if we're embedded inside of a bigger organization, then the question is, who cares? You know, is somebody else creating this opportunity for us to work with John because it's critical, or do they not care? Because this department, if they're functioning, could be well hidden because of those high functioning members, no matter how dysfunctional and miserable those people are on the team. The bigger organization may not care what kind of a leader John is, because to them, they're not seeing the misery of the workers, nor do they care, or the people are so functional that they are hiding the fact that there is this culture going on because their results don't show it. So there's no reason to look at John as an ineffective leader. So I think that, and I think this happens a lot. I think people get promoted to those positions, and the people under them can be very, very miserable because they are very poor leaders for whatever reason. And I think that the organization just continues to move along because people that work under that condition have their own, for whatever reason they stay and hide that dysfunction. Mm-hmm. Or the bigger organization may not care. So, I think if we knew a little bit better about whether or not this was a small organization that was going to go under, like you said, that the minute that those competent people say, oh, I've got a better opportunity, or the people that are competent and miserable say, I'm quitting my boss, and it all falls down like a house of cards, I think in a big organization, it may not matter. Versus a small organization where John is the big kahuna and we better develop him or his whole business is going to fall apart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, but you're exactly right. A lot of large organizations, and divisions within those large organizations succeed in spite of themselves.
In spite of themselves.
And the bigger organization doesn't care. As long as they keep grinding out those numbers. But as we talked about before, then as Lisa just pointed out, all of a sudden everybody quits. All of a sudden everybody's gone. And all of a sudden that former part of the organization that people didn't even think about, all of a sudden blows up. And even though it might be a small part, it becomes dysfunctional. All of a sudden you have a problem on your hands. If it's a big business, maybe not as much, but if it's a small business, it becomes a life and death struggle. So, again, with the limited data that you have, what I was hoping that you would figure out is they set up the quantitative so that that it really wouldn't show anything positive or negative, because they didn't want a graphic hitting the screen that punched them and punched the organization in the face. The numbers don't look that bad. The qualitative tells a completely different story. It puts the other data in a light that you understand. Oh, they didn't really want to know the hard numbers, but the other data says clearly John's an ineffective leader. You got two groups. They're in competition with one another. That bad things are around the corner. And lastly, this is all about John. Not knowing the situation, was he just thrust into this? Has he been there a long time? Did he set it up this way? What we have to do now is we have to assess. John is clearly a transactional leader. Clearly. Does John have the capacity to be a transformational leader? We're going to need to do some work with him. And if he's the person going forward, then we're going to need to do some group work, and the timeline and all the activities flow from that. But our number one is we've got to assess John.
Okay.
That's the crux of this whole case study is you have an ineffectual transactional leader for whatever reason. Going forward, for the organization to be successful, even though it's being successful right now, that doesn't mean it will be forever. Because you've been around for a while and you've always been successful does not mean that you will always be successful. And you can't continue with the things that you've always done and expect to always be successful if they're not organizationally built on sound organizational theory. And so going forward, it's all about John. Questions you have for me? This is a good one. You've all done well. I've not brought you all over to the dark side of data yet, but I'm working on it. To question data, to question why there isn't any the data itself. Why doesn't quantitative data tell us more than it does? Did you set this? Did you not ask the right questions because you didn't want to know the answer? Those are the kinds of things that you have to understand about data. We can shape it before it's ever collected. We can thump it. We can put our thumb on the scale. We can almost predetermine outcomes by our methodology of how we collect it. And if you have a particular agenda, that's what you do. But the best data is when you go out to find what you find. You don't place negative or positive connotations on it. You just find out what is. That's the best methodology for data collection. Is don't predetermine what you're going to find before you go. And that's what they did with the quantitative. They predetermined that they weren't going to find anything bad or anything that was shocking that would make a graphic that would punch you in the face organizationally. They made sure of that to start with. Question data. Always question data. All right. When are we getting back together again?
The weekend of the 6th.
There you go. Y'all all have a good week. If you need me, holler.
Thanks, you guys.
All right. Bless.